6, 5, 4, 3. We're live! Yes, look at that. There we are. Hey up, how are we all doing?
I'm very good, thank you, on this spooky Wednesday for our live stream based on Halloween.
Yes, I'm also very spooky.
I'm going to do my light show for 1 second. Oh no, I can't find my thing. Where's my thing? Oh, Alex,
So
you
what
want to
we
talk
talk
about
about
what we're
today then,
talking about today?
So today we're talking all about referencing because last week was Halloween, and because of Halloween, we thought we should use the spookiest topic that we've got available, the topic that inspired the most fright or scare into students. So that is referencing. And today, who are we, Tim? And why are we talking about referencing?
Well, today we're still who we always are. We're the library skills team. So on our far right, we've got the lovely Naomi, second appearance this season. Hello, Naomi. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Naomi. I work in the skills team, and this is my second live stream appearance this semester.
And your job title is Senior Skills Officer, isn't it?
I specifically put, when I first wrote the live stream plan, I specifically put that we shouldn't talk about our job titles because they're a bit... I love my job title, but it doesn't really mean anything.
It doesn't, no. But I raised it on the grounds that I saw in the script, do not talk about job titles. So, and because it's Halloween, we have to be a bit, teasy and averse to, rules and stuff. Alexander,
you're being very rebellious by talking about our job titles.
That's it. We're being rebellious. Alexander Wood in the middle.
Hi, I'm Alexander Wood, and I'm in the middle.
Hello, Alexander Wood. And your job title is?
Skills co-creator, but I am also a recent graduate of the university, now working and making online content.
Yes. Good. And I don't need to introduce myself because everybody knows me. What are we talking about today and how we're going to talk about it, Alex?
So today we're talking all about referencing. And first of all, we're going to have an overview of what referencing is. Then we're going to talk about ways that you could avoid plagiarism. So the different types of advice. So first of all, what plagiarism is and how you can avoid it. But secondly, some good tips and advice for that. We're then going to have a tour around the wonderful resource that is at the right that Tim is going to lead. To talk all about a specific example of how you can cite figures that you might want to use within your assignments, which is something that quite a few students have come to me with in the past. We'll then give a few tips for referencing before Tim will talk all about understanding journals, books, and libraries in general, to use his own words. And then finally, Naomi's going to talk about how actually you can correctly use in-text citations. So we've got a lot to cover in this live stream, but I'm looking forward to all of it.
It's going to be action-packed, isn't it?
Yep, jam-packed.
We've got an hour.
So shall we get started then, Tim?
Yes.
So would you like to give us an overview of what referencing is and why we actually do referencing at university?
Yeah, so I'll go into a lot more detail. I am slightly concerned, Alex, because I'm noticing that your signal is dropping out every now and then. So I'm just making reference to that so other people know it's there as well.
I'm just going to turn off my camera and be right back to try and sort that out.
Okay, thank you. So what is referencing all about and why do we do referencing? Well, referencing is all about attributing your sources and making sure that you are clear when it comes to where you got your information from. We're going to talk about a lot about referencing today. My presentation will actually explain a lot about the background of it. But basically, referencing is a critical skill that you need when you are at university, and you will need it to make sure that you actually get the right result. It's part of the whole academic process, so really important. And yeah, let's demystify it a bit and let's make it less of a horror story, because I think that's the goal for today.
So, Tim, what are some of the reasons why we actually do referencing them?
I just did that bit, didn't I?
Oh, did you? Sorry, I couldn't hear. Obviously, I missed that whilst I was disconnected. So one of the reasons why we do referencing is all about, as well as also showing where to find resources, is also to avoid something called plagiarism. And so, Naomi, Tim, what is plagiarism?
So just for reference for people who are actually watching this and wondering what the hell's going on, we had a reflective session and decided we were going to put names to our document and then explain all the different bits and pieces, and then we wouldn't get confused about who was doing what. But clearly, Alex has had a technical issue, and he's now confused. So maybe that doesn't work either.
Well, yeah. Usually, I think about what I'm saying first and then say it. Whereas this time, I was saying it whilst thinking about it.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. So we are at the what is plagiarism bit, aren't we, Alex?
Yes, Tim. What is plagiarism?
Plagiarism is where you actually use the work of someone else, either willingly or unknowingly, and pass it on as your own work. So it could theoretically even be considered a criminal offense when you do that. There's a famous case in the Netherlands where a professor wrote a piece of work that got lots of citations, and then it became known that actually all he'd done was pass the work of one of his students on as his own, and it ended up with the poor gentleman losing his professorship and being thrown in jail. So it can be quite serious.
It's technically a type of fraud, is plagiarism, because you're misrepresenting yourself. I won't go into that though, and I won't go into law either in this live stream. So Naomi, why do students actually plagiarize then?
So we talked about this as we were writing our lovely live stream plan, and we basically got two reasons. So students might plagiarize knowingly, as in you might think, I don't want to write my essay myself, or whatever thought process goes through your mind, you think, I am actively making a decision to pass off someone else's work as mine. And that could be for lots of reasons. In terms of the why, it could be for all manner of reasons. But also students might plagiarize unknowingly. So that is much more about not understanding the rules behind referencing, maybe not understanding the reasons why we reference, and just by mistake committing plagiarism. And I think for me, certainly when I was a student, that was the one that terrified me the most. I knew, because I've got control over whether I knowingly plagiarize or not, I knew I wasn't going to knowingly plagiarize. I knew I wasn't going to actively try and cheat, but I was quite terrified of unwittingly plagiarizing. So that was definitely a fear.
I would agree with that as well, having experience being a student as well. I actually remember overhearing a conversation between a student and a staff member, and the student had actually got in trouble for plagiarizing when actually what they'd done is they self-plagiarized by copying their own work. And that is a way that you can get in trouble for plagiarizing, by just reusing something you've done for a past assessment. So really understanding what plagiarism is and how you can avoid plagiarism is something that's really important. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to give you some advice for how you can actually avoid plagiarism. So the first thing that I would like to do is I'd like to ask Tim about how can you avoid knowingly plagiarizing.
So you always have to make sure that you actually realize that you are taking a statement from somewhere, right? So we talk about paraphrasing quite a lot and about quoting. The simple fact is that a lot of the ideas that you will be discussing in your work will have already been discussed by someone else, and the way that you add value to that is by rephrasing it and putting it in a different context or something like that. So the best way to avoid plagiarism is when you read something, when you learn something, to understand that that is a source for that information, and making sure that you remember one way or another. We talk about note taking a lot, for example, but that you remember where you got that information from. And to do that, you just stick a little note in your notes to say, this is where I heard this, which is a good way of doing it.
Can I just say, also just back reflecting on our live stream plan with our names by all our different points, can I just point out to everybody that Tim hasn't said any of the things that his name are by next to that question, but he has just made the point that my name's by. Just pointing that out there, Tim. Thanks for that.
Where are we? I had my glasses off.
I'm going to talk about how to avoid knowing plagiarism, which is the bit that Tim was just supposed to talk about. So ways to avoid knowingly plagiarize, basically, and at a very simple level, don't do it. Don't try and cheat. That's the basic advice there. But one thing, definitely avoid using assignment writing services. So there are services out there. Some of them don't always promote and market themselves as this is a way to cheat on your assignment. You get some, I believe, advertise themselves as proofreading services, things like that. So just be careful. If you're paying someone money to do any part of your academic work for you, that's probably a bad idea. So don't do that.
And they can. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that point because it's actually quite funny. Well, it's not funny. It was quite tragic. But years ago, when I worked at Sheffield, for example, we got a piece of work that I was co-marking. Oh, there's Miriam. Hello, Miriam. And it was an essay, 5,000 words, and the student was of Chinese background, Chinese heritage. I think they were probably born in China. And I read the work after having spent about 10 hours with that student in one-to-one tutorials and realized that the English was about 10 times better than what I would expect from that student. So I started to investigate, and one of my Chinese colleagues kindly translated the title of the essay into Chinese. We searched on a Chinese search engine, and hey ho, it turned out that this student had paid $500 for this particular piece of work to be written by a PhD student based in China. And unfortunately, that meant that this student was no longer a student because that was a breach of the academic regulations. So a lot of the time you get these adverts for essay mills, as they're called. Just don't engage with them really, because you're going to get caught out. It's really, really stupid because you're eating away your own experience, your own academic experience, your own learning opportunity by using them. So don't be tempted. It's a waste of money and most of the time anyway. And lecturers will actually find out that you have been naughty boy or girl or non-gender or transgender.
But so yes, I agree with what you said, Tim. But whilst a minority of students might actually be the type of people who would knowingly plagiarize, the majority of people who do get in trouble for plagiarism did it unknowingly. So now we're going to try and give some advice for how you can avoid plagiarizing unknowingly. And the first piece of advice that, first of all, Tim already gave, which was technically Naomi's, was to try and make clear within your notes what your ideas are, and compared to what you've read elsewhere. My piece of advice, which I had written down, is something that's very similar, which is all about organizing your references as and when you get them. So what I would do then is I'd make quite clear in my notes every quote that I have and where I've got that quote from. And then, following Naomi's piece of advice, you can then build on that with your own notes. But just stay organized. Take the time to organize your notes. So, Tim, what was your piece of advice for this particular part?
Well, Alex, I am reading very carefully and I believe I'm on track. I shall highlight it now.
We can't see your highlights, by the way, Tim. We can just see what you want on the thing.
Anyway, so yeah, it's hilarious this because Naomi and Alex know me quite well, obviously, and I have got a habit of going slightly off track. So they're trying to keep me in track, which is really good. So I'm going to talk about using a wide range of sources, aren't I, Alex?
Yes, you are, Tim. That's exactly what you're going to talk about.
So one way that you can actually stop plagiarizing unknowingly is if you are over-reliant on one or two pieces of work, then it becomes tempting to not actually acknowledge that that is the one or two pieces of work that you've been using. So you will cite them a couple of times, and then you put them in the reference list, and that's that. But you might have picked up a lot more ideas from that particular piece of work. One way of actually avoiding that happening, and it's good academic practice anyway, is to use more and different sources for your actual piece of coursework. So the more sources you get, the better anyway. In general, you just need to try and make sure you use a wide range of sources so you can make your argument stronger. Are you two are faffing about now? What's going on there? I don't know what's going on there.
Okay, Tim. So yes, use a wide range of source, really important, and a really important thing to do. So Naomi, do you have any advice that's just been given to you?
Yes. And I can talk about it and everything.
Can we just wait. Let's just highlight what's happening in the background for our confused viewers at this point. So we're all working on a screen where we have each other in Google Meet, and then we have another document open. And whilst I was talking, Alex and Naomi were literally fighting with each other over who was allowed to.
No, that's not what happened at all. Last week, Alex was trying to send me messages through the document, but I didn't have it open. So this week, Alex was sending me a message, and then I was just confirming that I'd read it because Alex might think I might not have got it again. But I have reflected on last week, and this week I now have this blooming document open.
But the funny part of it,
Fast becoming the bane of my life.
the funny part of it was the fact that I then realised that Naomi couldn't see it, so I wrote Naomi's name and took it off, and I was going to talk about it, and then she then came on the document just as I was deleting it. So that's why it was quite fun.
Can we also just acknowledge the law of diminishing returns, which is that the more that you try and prepare something, the less effective the preparation becomes, because I think we're suffering a bit from that at the moment. Anyway, Naomi.
Okay. So a lot of the points that we've been talking about basically, and this sounds straightforward, but it's worth making this point again, is just being really clear in your own mind what's your idea and what you have read somewhere else. So we've talked about that in terms of when you're making your notes, make it clear in your notes what you've read, what's your idea. So, and that carries through for when you are writing your assignment. So when you are there writing your assignment, this is me typing on my assignment, and if you use an idea that someone else's, put that referencing information in straight away. So you don't at any point lose track of what's your idea and what is someone else's idea.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Naomi. I totally agree. And definitely
Alex, you have a final piece of referencing advice.
So the final piece of advice for avoiding unknown plagiarism is to actually use Cite Them Right and to look up the referencing information as you go. So Cite Them Right is a tool that the university subscribes to that you can access through through the skills guides and also through the indexing databases that we have at the university, which basically answers every referencing question that you might have. So Tim is now going to switch the scene to a scene with Cite Them with a Google browser or whatever browser Tim uses.
This is so professional. I've switched to an unexpected Naomi, and now I'm switching to the browser. This is like proper, production values, and yeah, really good.
So Tim, can you show people, first of all, how to get to Cite Them Right, and second of all, show people why they might want to use it?
Yes, so I'm on the library website, which is www.ac.uk/library. And when you scroll down it, you can go to Learn Study Skills. And I have to put a bit of a proviso on. We are working on changing our web interface and our web presence. So this will change over time, so don't pay too much stock to it. You can also get to it through our lib guides. For example, if you go to the skills guides, then you can find Cite Them Right as well. So access Cite Them Right. When I click on Cite Them Right, it'll open up. I will log in. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Wow, this is professional. I am logging in so you can't see it. And then if it goes wrong, I can go, no, 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 no. Or if it goes right, I can just click that button and there we are, Cite Them Right. So we are in Cite Them Right. And this is the tool that we highly recommend as a library, but also as a university for you to use to do any citing and referencing. So I've shown you how to get into it. And now I'm going to show you one of the coolest things that a lot of students skip by, and they shouldn't because it's actually really valuable. You can see this is just a website at the moment. There's also a book version if you prefer working from books. You can get the book called Cite Them Right from Macmillan Publisher. But look at this, we have a basics section here. And in here, it'll literally explain all the stuff that we talk about, but way better because written by professionals. But yeah, this is basically going to explain all sorts of different things, like the top 10 tips. There's so many valid and really good resources here that you should be going into if you want to understand referencing better. So I can't stress enough, please, please, please use Cite Them Right because it's such a good piece of software and a book. So we will have a look at how you actually reference a book. This is the most basic way of referencing. Having a sip of water. Yeah, the most basic element that you can reference is a book, and then in particular a book with one author. So you can see I'm looking at printed books here. If I wanted to look at ebooks, I could click there, but I'm looking at printed books in particular, and I will click on a book with one author. And then you can see here that there is an example book with one author, in-text citation. So this is something that Naomi will be discussing later on, but in-text citations where you make the comment about where you found that particular piece of information. And then your reference list example here, J. Bell 2014, doing your research project, Maidenhead, Open University Press. And I will be discussing this in a bit more detail in my presentation later. but this is the basic reference. And the cool thing about Cite and Write is you can then try it here yourself. So you can quite literally go in there and type the surname, the initial, the year of publication, and the title. Cool Runnings. And the place of publication, publisher, series and volume number if relevant, whatever you want to add to that. So this might not be relevant, so you could take that off. And then you get place of publication, Sheffield, publisher, the School of Cool, and boom, you've got a reference. Now, one thing that I do need to highlight and stress is that this is in Harvard. If you use any of the other references, reference styles in your college, you can find those here. So we've got APA 7, 6, Chicago, IEEE, MHRA, MLA, Oscala, and Vancouver. And don't ask me what they all stand for. I'm a Harvard man through and through, but they all have different quirks and sensibilities. So if you want to go to Oscala, for example, which I know is used for legal, then you can actually find that here. And again, you get the same thing. You get the example in the footnotes because Oscala uses footnotes rather than citations. And you get a U try so you can make that work. The final thing I will talk about is the search function. And you can see here I've used it recently. And that is a search for lecture notes. I'm just double checking. Yeah, it is showing well on the screen. Lecture notes, when I click on that, I click on search and then you can see, you'll be able to see it's not happening. Why is it not working? Oh, it's still loading. I don't know why it's still loading. Doesn't like it. I happen to know. Yeah, I'm not sure why the search isn't working. It's probably because we are trying to do something. I happen to know though that in comms you will find live lectures, live speeches, so you could even refer to this live stream. Yeah, it's not working. I think my internet is not happy with Cite and Write at the moment. But you can find it using the search function. And that means that that is the introduction of Cite and Write. I'm going to transition back for a second and then we're going to talk about another issue. And we will get back to Cite and Write, but I am going to get Alex to talk to you for a second.
Yeah, we definitely need to be back on camera because Alex's cat is with him. So the world needs to see Alex's cat.
Show the cat, Alex. Show the cat.
Where's the cat tail?
What's that?
Alex's cat does not want Alex to use the pop filter.
Oh no!
You see, if you don't have a pop filter like me, this isn't an issue.
Oh, I see cat still. Yes, that's very exciting.
Yes.
Yes.
So so thank you, Tim, for doing that overview of Cite and Write. I think Cite and Write is really useful. The thing that Tim showed for books, you can do that for all the different types of sources.
Yeah.
And basically, I've been able to learn Harvard referencing through it because I used to use only Oscala before I started working here. And sorry, my cat's just sitting on my mouse. And I think that is really useful. So the next thing that we're going to talk about within Cite and Write actually is a specific example of citing a book, illustration, figure, diagram, logo, or table. So Tim, can you show people from the Cite and Write main page how to get to that?
Yes, let me just transition back into space and beyond. So within Cite and Write, and I am going to click on Media and Add. And then I am going to click, whilst I'm reading the document, of course. And I'm clicking book illustrations. Book illustrations.
Yes. Oh. Book illustrations, figures, diagrams, and logos. So I've had queries a few times from students about how to actually cite figures because this is something that can confuse people. So the first thing I do is do exactly what Tim has done. You could search figures, which is how I found this, or you could actually go to the media and art and then visual sources. And there's a page called Book Illustrations, Figures, Diagrams, and Logos. Usually, when people use Cite and Write, often it can be quite easy to skim past the top text on a page. But actually, just under the heading, there is the text which tells you exactly what you need to do when quoting a figure or using a figure within your work. So first of all, the first thing I'd recommend is use the box on the top right-hand corner to choose what style of referencing you're using, because that will change this advice. But in general, I'll talk about Harvard now, but the advice is very similar, but do make sure to check what type of source you're using. There isn't an option for a scholar, although to be quite honest with you, having used our scholar for 4 years now, I've never done this before in our scholar, but I have seen this done in Harvard quite a lot. So the key with this page is to actually, when you're citing a figure, it's to first of all go and cite it as the source that you're using. So don't focus on the figure itself, but focus on the individual source. So when you're actually using the in-text citation, which again, Naomi will go into a little bit more depth later on, what you need to do is use the page number. So you need the author's name or the organization's name, the year, the page number, and then you might need to reference, if it has a specific reference for the caption number or the figure number, reference that. So sometimes when you're reading a book, it might say this is figure 12, or it might say it is table 4. By identifying that within your in-text citation, it tells people which one it is, because sometimes on a page there might be multiple different tables. But do use the terminology that's within the book. You are able to call it what you want to start with if you're writing a logo underneath it. By logo, I mean figure caption underneath the figure if you're using an actual image of it. And you can call it figure 1, but then just add the in-text citation. So the author's name or organization's name, the year, page number, and then what table it is within that page. If there is no information about what type of figure it is or table it is, so if it doesn't say figure, table, or whatever, you don't have to include it. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. The reference list entry for a book illustration, figures, diagrams, logos, and tables, for example, they will always be whatever the original source is. So if you found it on a website, you reference the website, just like you would do any other website. If you found it in a book, you'd reference the book. So then go from this page and find what type of source you're looking for. So that is basically a very brief overview of how to reference figures. But once you know, you know. But sometimes when you don't know, it can confuse you. It has confused quite a few students in the past. But that should be all you need to know for that.
Yeah, so important takeaway in that, Alex, is that the figure and page only in Harvard anyway, so we're strictly talking about Harvard here. Look for your own reference style, use a different one. But in Harvard, the page number and the figure number appear in the citation rather than in the reference. And that's something that's quite useful to know and understand. And also, sometimes people overcomplicate referencing. I want to talk about that real quickly as well. We are back on camera, Alex, so you are playing with your pop filter, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, referencing, what the need for referencing is really basic, right? You aren't referencing, let me rephrase this. How am I going to say this without upsetting people? Referencing is a function, and as a function, it's something that, it needs to serve its purpose. Don't overcomplicate it if you don't have to overcomplicate it. A lot of the time, students ask questions about referencing where they are overthinking what they need to do, and you can simplify the whole process by just referencing the way that you understand referencing. And if you use Cite and Write as a backup, you will get the right answer, you will get it right. So stop worrying about referencing, stop making it a horror show. It really isn't all that scary. Ooh. You're both muted now, so I could talk forever.
Oh, I'm just talking. Sorry. Yeah, I would agree with that. I just made what Michael was making noise, putting the pop filter back on. Yeah, I would agree with that. So that's some really good advice, Tim. But do we have any other advice for referencing? So first I'll go to Naomi. Do you have any advice or top tip that you've got for referencing?
Yes, top tip, leave yourself enough time to do it. I absolutely take on board everything Tim has just said. However, it is worth giving yourself the time to look at things up inside them, right, to make sure you've got it done properly. Referencing is not fun in a rush. I think this sums it up. It is not fun to try and reference in a hurry. So we talked earlier about doing it as you go along. That's brilliant. Not only if you could not only put your citations in as you go along in the text, but build up your reference list as you do that. That's amazing. If not, make sure you've left enough time before your deadline to actually do your referencing.
Yeah.
I would agree, having been in that situation myself where I've done referencing in a rush.
It's something that's really common, isn't it? You know, people leave it to the last moment because they think it's the last bit of work that you have to do. But actually, you know, doing 20 references in 6 hours is a lot of work, and you increase the risk of it going wrong. And just get it done when you're using the sources rather than making it complicated.
So that's actually my piece of advice, which is all about referencing whilst you're writing. So don't leave referencing till the last minute. Write your references in first as you go. So as soon as you quote someone else's idea, this can help you to avoid plagiarism as well. Add in the reference information that helps you to do it, helps you to find it. So sometimes you might not put in the full reference information if you want to keep your flow going if you're writing, but at least put enough information there for you to know this isn't your idea. This is something that I will need to add in later. So I'd at least add the in-text citation in, or at least some form of entry into the reference list. That can help you later on. However, what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't rely on that to say, oh, well, I referenced as I went along. That means I don't have to spend any time referencing. When you're proofreading, and this is something I talk about my proofreading workshop next Tuesday, if you want to attend that, then I'll send a link into the chat later for where you can sign up for that. So when in the proofreading workshop that I'm going to have, that I'm going to run, I'm going to basically talk about the fact that you need to leave time for referencing. You need to double check your references, because just because you've done them in a rush, you might not have done them correctly. So my advice would be to go to Cite Them Right, look at the guidance on there, and just make sure you've done it correctly, because if you can spot lots of little changes, and some lecturers would like your references to be very, very perfect. So do make sure that you do use the right amount of attention to detail when you're checking them.
There's also advantages of doing them all at the same time. So we've talked about the advantage of doing it as you go. So you write a sentence and then you reference that bit and you write a bit more. But actually, referencing can be something that you can really get into the flow of. So you can get into like a referencing zone. So there's advantages as well of doing it all in one go when you're in that zone where you have remembered your where your commas go and things.
Yeah. Fair enough. I'm doing this. I'm like a seal at the moment. One of my pet hates, and I don't want to upset any colleagues, any of my sincere, wonderful academic colleagues, but sometimes I encounter queries from students where they say, oh, but my lecturer said that this reference is wrong. And then I check it, and actually, oh, there's a cat again. I check it, and it's not actually wrong, and it's the lecturer who's wrong. And that puts the student and the lecturer in a really difficult position. So, you know, if you are an academic and you are watching this, please make sure you understand fully your own referencing style, and that you don't accuse students of getting it wrong without you having checked Cite Them Right. Because frankly, there's nothing worse than to tell a student, well, yeah, you're right, they're wrong. We don't like doing that. So please avoid that situation. Yes, the cat is definitely stealing the show. Shall I talk about my last tip as well? There's two actually that spring to mind there. Yeah.
I'm going to turn my camera off and feed my cat if that's okay. I can go outside for the next 20 minutes anyways.
Okay, go ahead. Being organized with your references is really important. And actually, Naomi said this right, actually, and I hadn't thought about it in that way. The way I do referencing is that I put citation in my text where I need it, and I actually use the function in Library Plus to send myself the source so that I have all the details I need to make the reference at some point. I don't actually write the reference out fully yet because I'm not sure I'm going to use it, and because I need to, one of the last things you do when you've written your essay is actually go through all your citations and then making sure you've got the reference in your reference list. And one of the things that can go wrong horribly, and actually did go wrong in my own PhD because I made a silly mistake, which I will explain, but I had actually got two versions of my reference list for the PhD, and I ended up putting the old version of my reference list, which was basically my literature review reference list, in as the full thesis reference list. And I did a PhD in librarianship, well, information science. So you can imagine that the external who marked my PhD was rather upset to find that there were a lot of missing references for a lot of citations, in particularly in my methodology. and other parts of the PhD. And, very upsetting. But yeah, that's,
Did you leave yourself enough time to put the correct reference list
I
in?
had to, it was one of my fixes, so I got minor corrections, and that was one of them. And fortunately, I was able to actually demonstrate that I had 2 versions of a reference list, and my supervisor actually corroborated that and said that they had seen the proper reference list, and it was genuinely just a silly mistake. But what a silly mistake to make. So before you submit something, go through it, make sure that you just pick out your citations and that they have got references. And that's a lot easier with a 3,000 word essay than it is with a 90,000 word thesis. Yeah, but being organized with your references and citations is really important. And get into a system that works for you. We all have different ways of staying organized, but try and find that way that works for you, and stick to it, and make sure you just do a thorough job. In the end, it's all about, the Dutch word for this is nauwkeurigheid. It's about being precise. It's making sure that you get the details right. And as Naomi and Alex will wholeheartedly concur, that's not one of my strengths.
But anyone can do it, though, if they just take the time to do it, as Naomi said.
Absolutely.
Give it the time it needs, and do look at it with fresh eyes.
Absolutely, yes.
So I think that's all of our advice in the section about referencing, isn't it? But we've got a really good section coming up next, which is actually a section I'm really looking forward to for quite a bit, which is the You Might Find It Useful to Know section. So this week, Tim is going to be talking all about understanding journals, books, and libraries in general. So Tim, take the wheel.
Ooh, take the wheel. That sounds very exciting.
The metaphorical wheel. Even though technically you already had the wheel anyways.
Yes, I am in control. I'm in charge. Thanks, Alex. So yes, this session, I prepared this today, but I think it's going to be something that we will get back to a bit more. One of the important things when it comes to referencing is that you actually understand why referencing, where does it come from? And this particular session, we'll discuss that in a bit more detail. So it's about understanding journals, books, and libraries in general. And I would love to hear from you whether you think this is useful or not. So please do leave comments and all that, because I think this will be quite an interesting session. So, understanding journals, books, and libraries in general. Yes, what does that actually mean? Well, I'm going to begin with a bit of history about Timotheus Ruthzelstra, who was born on a kitchen table in the town of Drachten in 1978, which is an old Frisian place. Well, it's not old Frisian, it's a Frisian place, Drachten, but it means that I'm old. I'm 42. I'm so old now. I remember going to the public library and actually asking the lady for a book, and she would go into a set of drawers and would then find a little card for that book and put my name on it, so the library knew that I had that book. Gosh, that was before we had computers everywhere then. Yes, it was indeed. Since then, I have done 3 studies that make me quite position me as able to talk to you about the importance of libraries and journals and books. And that's that I've done library management and service in the Netherlands. I've got a master's with distinction in information management and a PhD in information science. So I think I know what I'm talking about, but I would love to be challenged. So if you want to find anything that you want to challenge me on, please do let me know. So this is going to be a bit of a trip into history. And the first starting point is libraries themselves. Libraries are basically as old as writing itself is. There's evidence of libraries dating back all the way to Sumerian society, which is modern day Iraq, essentially 2600 before Christ. So that's further away from the year 0 than we are now past the year 0. Imagine that, how long ago that was. And the function of libraries was that they would actually be used to organize, protect, and fight access to collections of texts, because Sumerians, the society of the Sumerians, relied on written texts, basically on clay tablets, to conduct things like trade, to keep track of how much people had paid in taxes, to do all sorts of things. So managing those clay tablets was really important. And that actually also shows where the word library comes from in terms of age. The word library comes from the Latin liber, which actually means book, and librarius or librarius, which is Latin for relating to books. And the Latin society, the Roman society, had a word for this, because it turns out, as all modern day librarians know, that the more texts that you actually store, the bigger the job of organizing them becomes. So libraries have had a role in society for a very, very long time. When I made this slide originally, I was going to talk about the oldest profession in the world, and then I remembered that there's another one that's probably older, so I wasn't going to go there. So actually, libraries were treasures, right? If you think about libraries in old age society, before we printed books like they are going out of fashion, before we had computers, written texts were actually really, really valuable. And the Library of Alexandria is probably the best known classic library. The Egyptian society, the pharaohs, collected books for centuries and they put them in the Library of Alexandria. And then woe be woe, the whole damn thing burned down and all these books were lost forever. But books equal treasure. People like the pharaohs would actually show off their importance by showing off how many books they have. So what was it that actually made books so valuable to people? The reason that books are valuable is because they actually store information. That information can then be disseminated. If you write it down, you can share it with more people than if you rely on something called oral tradition. So oral tradition is the art of storytelling, which a lot of societies used and still use to this day to transfer stories and to transfer information. But once you write it down, it actually becomes something that you can look after and you can carry it on for generations rather than relying on the art of storytelling. So something happened in the medieval times here in Europe, and that was that a chap called Johannes Gutenberg was born in the year 1400, and he is credited for popularizing printing in Europe. Now, if you ever do a pub quiz and someone asks you who invented the printing press, they will want you to say Johannes Gutenberg, and it's the wrong answer. The Chinese actually started printing in the year 220 AD, and that is only that what we know of. It is actually very likely that printing has existed in one form or another for a lot longer. But that doesn't matter because Johannes Gutenberg had the good fortune of being credited with popularizing printing, and that meant something really important. If you think about that era, 1400 to 1468, we still talk about the Dark Ages, and that sort of century is considered one of the Dark Ages because people were poor, downtrodden, they were all living in these feudal societies where only the rich had the means to actually read and write. And one of the main things that people would read or write about at the time was the one thing that monks used to write, and that was the Bible. So if you think about reading and writing, it was all about the ecclesiastical society, it was all about church, it was all about being able to disseminate the word of God, if you like. Printing changed that. It didn't do it straight away, but over time, printing became something that would actually revolutionize the way that people read and write. And that coincides with the rise of academic writing. And I will get to this in a bit more detail later on. But academic writing, the word academia is literally the place where Plato used to hold his lectures, where Plato in Greece would talk to his students. The word school actually derives from the Old English word or Middle English word scholar, which derives from the Latin scholaris, which then derives from the Greek word schole. And that means that schools, in one way or another, have been part of society for a very long time. But during the Dark Ages, the only way that people were going to school, to classes, if you like, was by going to church, to Sunday school, to learn about the Bible. And over time, that changed. And I will talk about that a bit more later on. But what was happening even in the Greek times was that conversations were increasingly written down. And I've got this little image here of a cyclops holding a big Greek pillar, a marble pillar, because actually one of the first texts, if you think about it, that was handed over from generation to generation was Greek mythology. So people already wrote that down way back then. Don't worry, this will become relevant in a second. So basically, if knowledge is treasure, like we stated before, then writing is power. And what Gutenberg actually did was found a way to distribute power across the masses. Although trust me, that was most definitely not his intention. The reason Gutenberg wanted to press was because he wanted to print as many Bibles as possible. And yes, that was to get Bibles to as many people as possible, but he could not foresee what he actually unlocked by creating the printing press. In the 18th and 19th centuries, under influence of the ability to read and write, so people were becoming more and more literate during these times, people also became more curious and more rebellious. And well, how does that hang together with all this? Don't worry, I'm going to explain it in a second. But the Industrial Revolution really started the process of democratization all over Europe. And these days, most countries in Europe, except for Belarus and I think Albania still, are democratic countries. That's all born from the invention of the printing press. Because people were becoming more and more literate, they became more and more curious about what was going on around them, and people were actually beginning to read and write about more than just the Bible. Printing became more affordable and more important at that same time. So let's put that into a bit of context. And I've called this slide because I thought it was funny, the rise of the serials. Because actually one of the oldest examples of newspapers was one that kept track of market prices. So one of the oldest functions of a newspaper was that they would announce what the price of a cow was on the market in Chesterfield or on the market in Derby, so that farmers could decide where they would sell their cows next time. So what was starting to happen with these newspapers is that they actually gave the middle classes a way to keep track of their investments. So farmers, again, growing cereals, would actually be able to understand what the price of grain was doing in the Ukraine, or whether it was in Spain, or, oh, that reminds me of that saying, but never mind. The price of cereals became increasingly published, and therefore people were balancing the market, if you like, and making decisions based on that. And this is where we get to referencing. So a newspaper will be published at regular intervals. So monthly, weekly, or daily. And if you were talking with a colleague about that newspaper in a letter that you wrote to those people, you would actually refer to that newspaper. So you would say something like the Leeuwarden Courant, 18th of September, 1745, page number 4. And I've used this example on purpose because I'm amazed. The Leeuwarden Courant is actually the paper that I read growing up, and it turns out to be one of the oldest newspapers in the world. Newspapers like that existed, like I said before, to announce the price of things, to actually make people aware of what was going on. And yeah, this is a really good example. 1658, I believe, that newspaper originally started. Alongside that increased literacy, then also came the rise of academia, and this is where we get to referencing books and journals. Because people were starting to talk about science outside of the ecclesiastical or church science. So if you think about someone like Newton or indeed Charles Darwin, people were starting to talk about physics, about science, about biology, about evolution, about all these different things. And in the 1800s, this really started to accelerate. And part of the acceleration had to do with the fact that people could print these things, and it was accessible, made accessible to a lot of people through the use of libraries. So the more documentation you will get, the more you needed to manage it, the more you needed to organize it, the more it became important to actually reference these different documents. And also, because it became more popular, you would get more scientists, and they would then write more books and journals. And it would go up incrementally. People would be publishing more, people would be arguing more, and then people would be publishing about that more, and people would argue about that more. So you can see it's almost like a snowball. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and people needed to manage that somehow. So knowledge is the result of debate. If you go back all the way to Plato and Socrates and Confucius and all these other philosophers, they came to certain decisions based on debate. And to streamline scientific debate, mainly in the 18th and 19th century, scientific institutions started to publish academic letters in things called journals. So that's the origin of our academic journal. And these scientific institutions themselves became publishers. So if you think of the Oxford University Press, which you might have come across, Cambridge University Press, we even had a University of Derby Press at some point. Publishers were people that were organizing the publication of journals. And journals became the de facto format. in which you would present, attack, or defend a scientific revelation, and it still is to this day. So any scientist whose word their salt has a target to publish in journals, because when you publish in journals, you're taking part in the proper debate. And just like newspapers before them, journals are published as serials. And why that is important, we will get to now. So a journal reference is one of those things that sometimes stumps people and they find the terminology confusing. I'm going to go all the way back to when these journals were being printed in the 1800s. What would happen is they would actually be printed in a sequence. So you would have the first volume and the first issue, which would be volume 1, issue 1. If you then went through the year, that volume 1 would get issue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you get volume 2 in the second year, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The reason that they did that was because when you went to the library and you were looking for a specific issue, if they were all in a nice, neat order that everybody agreed and understood, it would be a lot easier to find that particular journal. These days, we've got a computer, we type in the keyword, we find a journal article, Bob's your uncle. But of course, back then, we didn't have computers. I started this presentation by talking about me as a little boy going to the public library and having to get a card. So a volume and a issue is important. And when you look at citation, you can see that the title of the journal is followed by the issue information. And an important note here is that a title of a journal is also the title of the publication. And in Harvard, that's the bit that goes into italic, not the title of the article, because the article is not the title of the publication. Right, well, if you are still with me, then I will talk to you about why this actually matters. And this book here, the Ura Linda, is a great example. This was published in 1860, I want to say, in Friesland, in Drachten, where I was born, and this book was full of spurious claims. It was actually written in the style of Old Frisian by someone whose only goal was to sell as many copies of this as possible. And how do you sell as many copies of it as possible? You claim that it's scientific, that it's got evidence in it of wonderful things. And one of the wonderful things that this text claimed was that all the royals in Europe actually stemmed from one Frisian warrior, and they had all been fooled into believing they were separate families, but all the royal families were indeed Frisian, and therefore Frisian had a right to rule the whole of Europe. Of course, we have that right, but not based on the claim in this book. And this demonstrates why it is so important to attribute the sources that you use. We've talked about plagiarism in this stream already, but with false claims arising, it's even more important that you reference your sources. And at least if you attribute your work, people understand that you too were fooled by the cheater. One final thing to note on that is that plagiarism has been around for a very long time, and if you are interested, you can Google whether Charles Darwin plagiarized the work of a man called Wallace, because it's actually a really interesting story. Right, you'll be pleased to know that that is the final slide for me here. And today's reference, you can see here, I've actually cited or referenced the live stream. So this is how you do it. You can do it as well. You cite them right. You're definitely going to get it right. And this is the sign where I let Alex and Naomi know that we are coming back.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hey! See, I knew it was longer than 10 minutes. Sorry.
So we've had a comment in the chat asking about whether we can cover what is meant by in-text citations and quotations. So that's actually quite well planned, because that's actually what we're going to talk about next, isn't it, Naomi? So in the not grammar topic of the week, Naomi is going to talk all about that, basically, in-text citations.
Yes, and I believe, am I having my PowerPoint slides on, Tim?
You are, yes. I'm going to do the cool
Wonderful.
transition. Do we want to transition now? Are you ready?
Go for it.
Excellent. Whilst we are transitioning...
Tell me when I can start talking, Tim, and I'll start.
You can start talking.
Okay, so just in direct response to that question in the chat, I'm just going to talk ever so quickly, just to explain some of the terms that we're talking about. So we talk a lot about citing and referencing. It's often bundled together as one thing, citing and referencing, but it's two separate things. Citations, citing, making citations, are what you do in the text of your essay or your assignment. So when we talk about in-text citations, we talk about what happens in the text, in what you are writing. So you're writing your assignment, you're making your point, you've got your lovely paragraph, and within that, you have a citation. When we talk about a reference list at the end, that is at the end of your essay. So you've finished your assignment, you've finished writing your assignment, and then at the last thing you put in, we won't worry about appendices or anything like that, but after your assignment, you then have a reference list, and that has the full references of everything that you have looked at. So what you do with your citation in the text is make it clear right in the text where you are talking that this is not your idea, that it's someone else's idea, and you give credit to that. But you don't want to put all the full details into your text because that would take up lots of space, it would take up your word count. So you do a briefer citation in your text, and then that links up with your reference list at the end that has the full details of what you have read. Also about quotations. So quotations are when you are directly writing out what you have read. So we also talk about paraphrasing, summarizing. Essentially, if you are summarizing or paraphrasing, you are putting things into your own words. If you are quoting, then you are using exactly the words that the other person has used, and you need to make that clear as well. So you need to make it clear, it's not my idea, these aren't even my words, this is this person's words. Quotations can be a good thing or a bad thing, and depending on context. Sometimes you really add value and show that you have understood a point by putting it into your own words. The fact that you can take that point and shape it into your own words demonstrates that you have understood that point. But sometimes a quotation is really relevant. If it's something where they've said it, maybe it's a short point, you want to quote exactly what they've said, that you need that detail of exactly what that person said, then you need a quotation, and you need to make it clear that you have quoted. So when you're doing this in-text citation, and I'm just here talking about referencing styles that use an author date format. So Harvard and APA are the really key ones here. Referencing styles that use footnotes, I'm not going to focus on so much because that doesn't include a citation within the text that breaks up the flow of your text. It's a very different thing, but as we've said all along, make sure you're checking your own individual or your own referencing style that you need to use for your course. But for Harvard and for APA that use an author date format, you will need to put some of this key information in the text that we've got on the screen. So you'll need either the author or editor's surname or their family name, you'll need the year of publication, and you might need the page numbers. So it's not the full details. It's not, Tim was just talking about publication name. It's not any of that. You just need these brief details. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Tim? So this next slide is a quote from Pears and Shields. And I've put this in as I would do a citation. I've made it bold. You wouldn't make it bold, but I have made it bold just to highlight which fits the citation. So Pears and Shields, 2019, page 7, describe citing as referring to someone else's work or ideas in the text of your essay or assignment. So here I've put my beginning of my point starts with the author surname. So I've done that as part of my sentence, and then I've put the brackets around the year and the page number. On the next slide, Tim, if we can go to that. Here I haven't used the author's surnames as part of my sentence. My sentence stands on its own without that, so I've put it at the end, all of it within brackets. So I hope that's clear. If you're using the author's names as part of your sentence, then just put the year in brackets. If you're not using the author's names as part of your sentence, then that whole thing needs to go in brackets like that. And on the last slide, just going to give a point about when you would use page numbers and when you wouldn't. So those first 2 points I have put the page number in, because certainly for Harvard, you need to use a page number if you've got a direct quote or if the information that you're giving is specifically relevant to a certain page. This last point, Pears and Shields give a comprehensive overview of how to cite and reference it using the 8 most popular referencing styles. That's not specific to any page of that work, so I haven't given a page number, I've just given the year. APA is a bit more complicated than Harvard about whether or not you use page numbers. And that, again, I'm sorry, Tim, can come down to the preference of your lecturer. So it's often worth double checking with your lecturer if you're not sure about that, and always check back on cite them right. The key thing with citing in text, these citations shouldn't be breaking up the flow of your sentence. So a really good tip is to read that sentence aloud. If you're stumbling over the citation, or if it's really interfering with the point you're trying to make, then maybe think about including that citation in a different way. So play around with where you've got your brackets, where you're putting your citation, to try and make that sentence that you're writing flow in the best way possible.
Thank you,
and
Naomi.
that, I think, is all I have time for.
I have to apologize now because I didn't know where to click. So some of the slide changes might have been a bit chaotic.
Okay, that's all right.
So is that, what do we say, Alex? You're muted, so you're not going to say anything. So shall we ask the floor for some further questions and see if there is anything else that people want to say? And if there are or are not, then we will move on and close this live stream. Woo! I've not done this yet.
So I've got one last thing that I could say, but I want to see what your thing is, Tim. Oh, it's a spooky thing. So two last things.
I've done that already, Tim, just for reference. Oh, no, you haven't done that.
Oh, dear. Come on.
No, I think you should stop doing that.
Okay. So so something that we try to do with these workshops is we try to have an activity for you to take home and do outside of the workshop. This week, my challenge for you is to, outside of the workshop, go to Cite Them Right. I can link that in again in the description, in the chat. I already have done though, and it will be in the description of this video if you're watching this not asynchronously. And have a look at the basics section, read through that in your own time. And also consider adding Cite Them Right to your favorites bar so that you can access it when you need it. Because that's my advice of referencing, is actually, you don't need to know the referencing information off the top of your head, but you do need to know it. But what you do need to know is where to find the information when you actually need the referencing information. So yeah, Tim, have you got anything else to add?
No, I'm curious what people thought of what did you two think of my presentation? Was it informative or was it too long?
I missed parts of it because I was feeding my cat and then letting my cat out.
That's it.
It was a lovely presentation. I want to go back and look at it with the slides because I couldn't see the slides. So I thought that was interesting, actually, listening to a presentation that was referring to slides without being able to see the slides.
I know,
and they're all very interesting, Tim.
Good.
It was making me think of Wolf Hall. Wolf Hall is one of my favourite books, but they talk a lot about the printing press there and its role in the Reformation and all that kind of thing. And that idea of power, really, really interesting.
Excellent, good. We'll make it into a video. We'll stick it on this channel at some point, Alex, shall we?
Yep.
Yep.
I do.
Good. So that was today's live stream. Just another point. I've got a new, well, it's not a new camera actually. I'm using my phone as a camera, and I think it looks better. And you don't see cereal bowls in the background. So,
although I can see, because I've got the on a half screen, I can see more of your background than you might think.
Well,
but yeah,
don't scare me. What do you mean? Are you talking about this? We've talked about Friesland a lot, right? I'll just highlight this.
Okay, I thought it was Jack Daniels, to be honest.
No, this is a classic. It's made of clay, right? Like it's clay work. And it's Berenburg, and that's the Frisian tipple. It's my favorite tipple. So if you are ever in Friesland or even in the Netherlands, because it's sell everywhere, and you see something that's called BERENBURGER, then buy it me and give it me, and I will be incredibly happy. And I'll even write your essay for you.
But you might get kicked out of university for doing so.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, so we didn't say that out loud during the live stream.
We were talking about Friesland in this household the other night because my husband is reading my 4-year-old Beowulf as a bedtime story, as you do. And Friesland features in Beowulf.
Yes.
I can't remember if they're good guys or bad guys.
Of course we were good guys.
Of course they were the good guys.
Honestly,
obviously.
Yeah.
Depends on who wrote it and who.
It wasn't in Uralinde. Yeah. Beowulf is actually really interesting. You need to read the Shay Heaney wrote a modern language version of it, and it is brilliant. It's such a good book. Yes. Right, on that librarian's note.
The one that we're reading. He's not reading it to her in the original. She's 4.
Come on, he should. It's great. It is a bit scary for a 4-year-old, though.
Yeah, and she's coping with it really fine. She's really interested. She asks really relevant questions.
Excellent. Good. Right, I've got a meeting in 25 minutes and I want to walk. So should we call
So
it a
on that
day?
bombshell, I guess it's time
Yes.
to end the stream. Thank you very
Wave.
much for watching. If you have got any questions about referencing, email them to library@derby.ac.uk, which I shall add in the description.
Slow motion.
Thank you very much for watching. Bye.
No, you wave. Why do you?
A wave.
Oh yeah,
I'm
bye.
going to wait and end the stream.
Of course you can. Bye.
Bye.